Welcome, everyone, to our panel called Reinventing Economic Development. This session is part of the 4th Annual Rising Economy Conference hosted by South Island Prosperity Partnership. My name is Laurie Henderson, and I'm the Regional Director for the Vancouver Island and Coast region within the federal government agency called Pacific Economic Development Canada, or called Pacifican. We have 2 offices on the island, one in Campbell River and the other in Victoria, where I'm based. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking with you today from the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen peoples, whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. And thank you to the South Island Prosperity Partnership for the opportunity for me to introduce this virtual panel session today. Pacifican understands and values the important work that SIPP does to convene member communities and organizations across the South Island to advance strategic regional economic development opportunities. And I'm very grateful to be here. And to help support SIPP's work, Pacifican announced this past Wednesday that we're providing $50,000 for the delivery of both this year's conference and the 2025 Rising Economy event. And this is reflective of our agency's interest in and commitment to advancing ECDEV discussions and opportunities in communities and regions across the province. And as a regional office here, our team is very excited to be on the ground in the South Island and to be participating in conferences like these in order for us to really understand economic development ambition and opportunities in the South Island and how collaboration can drive those efforts. So it's a pleasure for me to be here today. And following the conference, I look forward to hearing from anyone who would like to know more about who we are and what we do as a regional development agency for the Government of Canada. So in a moment, I will turn things over to our speakers, but first, a quick overview of the format. About halfway through the conversation, we'll be taking your questions for our speakers. You can submit a question anytime through the Zoom Q&A below this video. This session is being recorded, and you can submit your question anonymously if you prefer. To interact with other attendees, you can use the Zoom or Whova chat, and the production team will monitor the Whova chat and the Q&A for those of us joining through the app. And then finally, if you're posting your takeaways to social media, please use the hashtag RisingEconomy2024. So for now, to introduce our moderator for today, I'd like to welcome Emilie de Rosenroll, CEO of the South Island Prosperity Partnership since its inception in 2016. Emilie has led SIPP through several key stages, from its startup phase with 29 founding members and a team of 2, through the region's bid to put a new collaborative approach on the map by competing and getting shortlisted out of hundreds of submissions across the country in Canada's first Smart Cities Challenge. Further, the approach that SIPP took through the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic that resulted in millions of dollars of new project funding for the region to move from recovery to resilience. Now, with over 70 members in the collaborative alliance, and with new projects and initiatives both announced as well as in the pipeline, SIPP is very well positioned into the future. And with that, I'll turn it over to you and welcome Emilie.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Laurie. I'm very excited for this panel. It's obviously a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. 8 years ago, our region came together to create a multi-jurisdictional and cross-sectoral alliance called SIPP. And today, we're going to be able to explore how that model has evolved, how it's had impact in the region, and most importantly, where can we take it in the future? So as our region grows and we expand and our challenges get more complicated in many respects, how can we position ourselves to address issues and opportunities that we see in the 21st century, including things like affordability, climate change, lack of healthcare access, and also create prosperity. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists, and I'll just ask them to turn on their cameras here. I will begin by introducing Steve, who is a councillor and longtime resident of Sidney. Steve is the principal of Tides Group, a company focused in sustainable tourism and agriculture. Previously, as the manager of business operations at the Sandown Center of Regenerative Agriculture, Steve supported the stewardship of biodiversity, fostering growers and engaging community in food security and climate mitigation. In addition to his role on Sidney Council, he sits on the CRD Climate Action Intermunicipal Task Force, and he's also a member of SIPP's Municipal Partners Committee. Next, I'll introduce Evan Pivnik. Evan has worked at Clean Energy Canada since 2021, and he recently took on the role of Clean Energy Program Manager. Before joining Clean Energy Canada, Evan served as the Chief of Staff for the BC Green Caucus during the 2017-2020 minority government. He was also deeply involved in the creation of Clean BC, British Columbia's climate strategy. Evan will have a lot to say on about bringing climate mitigation and also prosperity together. All right, next, I will introduce Christina Clarke, the Executive Director of the Indigenous Prosperity Centre, which is part of South Island Prosperity Partnership. Before joining the IPC, Christina spent 27 years with the Songhees Nation, serving as Senior Finance Manager, Executive Director, and the inaugural CEO of the Songhees Development Corporation, overseeing their 3 companies and partnerships in tourism and hospitality, property holdings, cannabis retail, and the marine industry. Christina honors her I'm so sorry for mispronouncing that, Nunatukevet heritage, Inuit European ancestry through her mother, and is proud to be a second generation Irish Canadian on her father's side. Now, Dallas Gislason, Executive Director of the local Economies, South Island Prosperity Partnership. Dallas has been part of SIPP since the very beginning, and he was part of the group of community leaders who worked to create the regional alliance model through Greater Victoria Development Agency back in 2012. Prior to that, he worked on many award-winning economic development teams and initiatives in several areas of Canada, also the US and overseas. All right, now, without more delay here, I'm going to kick us off with a first discussion, and I'm going to hand it over to Dallas to begin. So can we start our conversation with just some context around and the examination of the whys? So you've practiced economic development in different parts of the country, and your roles in economic development have really exposed you to practices around the world. Can you start off by telling us what are some of the key conventional practices for economic development, and what do you think is going on there? Are they helping us out? Are they getting a little out of date? What's going on?
Yeah, this is a really fascinating question, obviously near and dear to my heart in economic development. And I thought that I was thinking about how to answer this in a concise way, and I thought it's probably impossible, but without going into like the history of like, you know, where economic development came from in the early 20th century, which was really an industrial economy, right? And the profession or the approach to economic development really emerged from this idea where you wanted these big factories to locate, you know, in your community for the purpose of getting the tax base and creating the jobs and lowering unemployment and all that kind of stuff. And so the practice at that time became about basically lowering taxes or building infrastructure or even subsidizing labor or training it rather, to get these big factories going in your town. So that's sort of where all this came from. And that became the dominant practice for economic development for decades and decades and decades. And even through the post-World War II era, it still sort of remained. And then it's kind of one of those things where, like, if you think about the idea of trickle-down economics, where in an industrial type of environment, yeah, once you get this big factory set up, it's really hard to take it down. And therefore, you know, offering massive tax incentives sort of works in that context. But as we all know, that's no longer the world that we live in. And so economic development started evolving, I think, in the 70s and 80s, and I'll talk more about where it's going in the future. But we looked at sort of, you know, the traditional investment attraction idea, and then we said, okay, well, what if what if it was super important to look at retention? Like, how do we keep our tax base and our employers and our small businesses, existing, and what are their needs? And sort of that's sort of the contemporary approach was more, the existing companies create up to 80% of new jobs, and so therefore they become the focal point. And then you look at like the sort of the tech boom, right? And the focus then shifted again toward more of the entrepreneur, the focusing on tech and trying to become the new Silicon Valley, right? That was the moniker the last 20 years of all these city strategies trying to attract technology and tech entrepreneurs and stuff. And I would say just to where this is all going again is that what we've seen now is a shift. I mean, many different shifts, but one of them would be like the growth of remote work. And so if you want to attract like a company, if their workers are all remote, then the company itself becomes a very difficult proposition to actually attract, because the company they're basically a digital employer now, and the workers can work anywhere. And so therefore, if you use the traditional approaches to ECDEV, lowering your taxes and trying to give them incentives, it's a really, really difficult proposition in that context. And so what I think, just to wrap this up, is I think that the model will be more around place-based strategies, becoming more and more important. So looking at the context of what your assets are and what your strengths are and who the people are in your community, what strengths they have, and then figuring out how you can actually take all that and actually adapt it to a modern economy, right? So like upskilling your workers, building infrastructure that's resilient toward big changes like climate change, for example, big weather events, all that. Facilities that are more collaborative in nature, co-working, facilities that offer multi-different sectors to work under the same work, and sort of that multidisciplinary concept, I think, will be super more important. And then all of that sort of positioning your community in a global economy. We all know the economy is still global, but you're looking at how you're positioned in the economy. And I'm sort of rambling now, but the last thing I'll say on this is one thing that we sort of discovered in the pandemic was there's this new recipe for post-pandemic economies, and we shorten it into RISE, right? So resilience, the importance of being resilient and adapting to changes, and like climate change and technology and all these things. The importance of innovation, or having an innovative community. That's, again, you need innovation to be resilient, because you're adapting and you're investing in new things or adapting technologies. Sustainability, the S, right? So that's just non-negotiable, like sustainability for climate, but also for ecology and how we use resources. And then the last one is equity. So it's looking at not sort of like moving on from the trickle down concept and more toward like who owns the assets, who gets to own them, focusing on education and upskilling, directing capital toward things like the Indigenous economy or the underrepresented groups that we all know are super entrepreneurial. And looking at other alternatives like employee ownership, worker co-ops, and all that kind of stuff. But anyways, that's a long ramble, but the history of ECDEV and where I think it's gone to.
History, a pretty good history of ECDEV in under 3 minutes. So I think those were some pretty good rambles. All right, well, thank you. And I'm going to move into a bit of a gear shift in terms of a different perspective. But before I do that, obviously, I'm turning it over to you, Christina. First, let me see if I can get it right. Kavut. And please correct my pronunciation. I practiced this multiple times and then I forgot my glasses. So can you help us with that, please?
Kavut. The Kavut are the Labrador Métis. So I was a member of the Labrador Métis Nation many years ago, but now their membership has a residency criteria. So I'm currently not a member. So I'm not an Indigenous rights holder, but because of that ancestry, that was what my interest in the area of Indigenous economic development came from. But really, it's my experience with Songhees Nation as a witness embedded into their governance structure to help them do the work. So that's the perspective I'm coming from.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for correcting me. I knew you would, so thank you for that. All right, Christina, I have the big burning question for you is, can you tell us a bit more about yourself And I mean, I've had the pleasure of working with you for many years now, but I know that the audience would love to hear more about you and in your own words, what is it, the Indigenous economy? And the other piece is, is this a new idea? Because of course we hear this more and more in terms of the national and the provincial languages around economic and Indigenous reconciliation and economic reconciliation. But is Indigenous economy a very new word or, new concept, or a very, very old one? Can you help us with that?
That's not an easy question to answer, sort of both. But in terms of who I am, you shared a bit about my bio, and I've spent most of my life in working in this space. So it's a big part of who I am. And I was married in the Songhees Wellness Center. My daughter's high school graduation was held in the Songhees Wellness Center. So it's really been a big part of the burning passion that I have, is to contribute to economic reconciliation for Indigenous people in Canada. So it's kind of the driving motivation behind what I do. And you asked in my words, what is the Indigenous economy? But I have to quote Caroline Hilton. I feel like we can't talk about Indigenous economic development without quoting Caroline Hilton. And I highly recommend her book, Indigenomics, Taking a Seat at the Economic Table. So Caroline says that it's time to increase the visibility, role, and responsibility of the emerging modern Indigenous economy and the people involved. This is the foundation for economic reconciliation. This is Indigenomics. And I really agree with her. So the Indigenous economy, it refers to all of the economic activity that's undertaken at a First Nation level, but also by Indigenous entrepreneurs. And it also includes the partnerships that they choose to take part in. So joint ventures, non-Indigenous and Indigenous people, that's also an example of Indigenous economic development. It's not new. And there were thriving economies all across Turtle Island, but we know from here on Vancouver Island, very strong economic activity and really very prosperous people with lots of resources. But that with colonization, that economy was subjugated and suppressed, I mean, actively, legislatively suppressed. And residential schools was one of the mechanisms to do that. So what we have today is a reemergence of Indigenous economies and a renewal of the interconnectivity between economies. And when we did one of the last projects I did with Songhees Nation was a derelict vessel removal project. And we did that in collaboration with multiple First Nations up the coast. And we talked about that in terms of reigniting historic trade routes. These on the waterways, there would have been from village to village, from nation to nation, lots of trade and interconnectivity. And under the modern structures with the reserve system, nations turned inward and inward focused. And the economy is very much sort of a social welfare system designed by the reserve system. And then that kind of sense of lack, of limited resources, of not enough to go around, would make First Nations competitive with one another for limited resources instead of the collaboration that had occurred, the trade that had occurred, and going into one another's territories for harvesting that occurred prior to colonization. But I think it's an exciting time for Indigenous economic development, and there's huge potential. I think we'll talk about that with some of the other questions.
It's amazing. It's so fascinating too, the challenge to the notion of borders even, and looking at historic trade patterns and how those predate the construction of Canada and the United States as we know of them today. So thank you for those perspectives. Next, I'm going to move it over to Steve and shift gears a little bit here. Steve, you have a very interesting perspective as a local leader and also a business operator, and kind of gives you a dual perspective here. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, if you think that municipal, where the municipal economic issues lie, the biggest ones, and do you think that, who's got the most levers in that conversation? Is it local, provincial, or federal government? Where do you think that, who has got the levers?
Thanks, Emilie, and thanks for having me on this panel. I'm humbled by the others around me and their expertise, so I'm glad to join this. And I really think that certainly in this area, our economic development is regional, and that partly is because of geography. We're on the tip of an island surrounded by water, and so it kind of dictates that we have to be operating regionally. And certainly, the old saying, alone you can do it, but you can't do it alone. It's important to recognize that, because I think we have strengths in all our different areas and different businesses, different municipalities, different organizations, different nations. But it really is that I think we can do better together. And I think that's the importance of someone like an organization like SIPP, is bringing those groups together, because we have so much to share. The shared services that we can bring together, the partnerships we can elicit, will help us develop. And you heard it through the last 2 days of just the importance of community, the importance of relationships. And that doesn't exist in the microcosm of a municipality, because I live in Sidney. I don't know where well, I do know, but most people don't know where the border is between Sidney and North Saanich. Do you know where the border is between Saanich and Victoria, between, Colwood and Langford? And that's an infrastructure border. And that's what we build out to in terms of the municipality. But within that region, we all work together. We all go get our groceries across in another community. We get our, we go to recreation in another community. We hike in another community. So it's about, we're all one. And to recognize that is the most important thing. And how can we do it together? And one of my favorite sayings right now is, a rising tide floats all boats. And how perfect for this area that we have the opportunity to rise together. And certainly through things like Victoria Rising and that element is important to recognize that we can do this together. And I can't emphasize that more. And that's why I'm actively involved in SIPP and where we're going, because it is about that operation, about how we can start to share those services. And you see that even between some municipalities in terms of shared police, shared water, shared fire services, shared recreation services. But now we have to do that more with our economy, and recognizing that we can bring the value of one community to another, whether that's an organizational community, a citizen community, or a geographic community, bringing them together to build a better and more successful economy in this area.
Well, those couldn't be better words for us to hear. I mean, we certainly agree with you and think that the levers, we see that the levers as individuals and as individual units, we don't have them, but working together, we actually can make an impact on these sort of complicated issues. So thank you, Steve, for that one. Evan, I'm going to turn it over to you now. You might want to pan us out a little bit, given your experience at the BC and the national level. But can you tell us where in your experience, you might have seen places that are leading the pack when it comes to handling those dual pressures of, environmental challenges, and also at the same time, the need for economic growth? We know we can't just stay where we are. Our population is growing, and we need to maintain a quality of life, and so we have to see economic growth. So, Evan, what are your thoughts on sort of best practices and what you've seen?
Yeah, thanks, Emilie. I think a lot of it is going to be pulling on different threads that everyone else has mentioned here. We're in the midst of the single largest transformation of our energy system. That's really what all of this is fundamentally about. We are trying to pull the engine of the economy out to replace it with a totally different system, all while not crashing it, all while seizing new opportunities. The scale of it is immense. And there's so many different examples of leaders in different places, but the sort of common thread amongst those that are leading is they're no longer siloing these challenges into, it's environment, this is climate, this is economy, but it's actually the layering of these all together. So 3 different sort of examples at scale. I think I'd look at the European Union, I'd look at Quebec, and then I'd look at regions in Western and Southern Australia. Across all 3 of those examples, what you have is jurisdictions that have really centered this need to bring together, as I said, that sort of climate, economic, energy policy. These aren't disparate practices. These are all together. And I think even just I've been working in the climate space directly or indirectly for over a decade now. There's been just a complete change in the last 3 years, because we're suddenly talking about economy building in a way that we just weren't talking about before. So I think like 3 best practices or specific pieces that I think all of these examples share. One is that they've put a real emphasis on partnerships, that this is about municipalities, provincial, federal decision makers, private sectors, education institutions. It's really about bringing together the human capacity and then the institutional structures that exist and trying to align on how we navigate this. There's so much uncertainty in all of this that if we're all just pulling in different directions, you're not really going to go anywhere. When you bring everyone to the table and look at new processes that make this a shared project, all of a sudden you're able to seize all sorts of really interesting opportunities. I think the second piece is infrastructure. And I think that that is everything from, energy system to human infrastructure to critical infrastructure like housing. This is understanding that if you're trying to build opportunities, the actual underlying infrastructure is what enables it. Otherwise, it ends up being a whole series of little islands. And the last piece, actually, and Dallas mentioned this, it's place-based. It's an understanding that we've kind of moved on from us, or not moved on, but this sort of global economic system isn't just driven by lowest cost as the sort of overarching and dominating principle when it comes to where opportunities exist. Security of supply chains, other values. I mean, I saw ESG is on the decline with BlackRock, but instead it's transition financing. It's aligned with where the energy system is going. These sorts of values are, and the ability to align on those values and understand the unique, specific geographic opportunities there. That's really where we see, I think, regions coming out ahead and really putting some best practices down.
Well, just to pick up on something then you've said there, I'm one, you've got also a background where you were working in politics in the past. I know that feels probably like a long time ago for you now, but I'm wondering if, as we look toward the next national election, for example, like are these topics, maybe be more pointed here, Emilie, is this still a partisan issue? Is this going to change our focus, our values? Are they going to be reflected no matter what the different political outcomes could be at the provincial or federal level?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways the answer is yes and no. I think doing it well and seizing opportunities, there is aspects of this where we can work against ourselves and undermine technology, undermine opportunities, create a whole bunch of things where we're trying to cling on and use outdated systems and approaches and try to apply them to new problems. And I think that will serve us very poorly. The flip side is the most important climate policy in Canada is what everyone else is doing. We are a major taker when it comes to how all of these different pieces come together. So when the European Union is actively working to set up critical mineral supply chains and is talking about putting up carbon border adjustments, or the US invests hundreds of billions in the Inflation Reduction Act and infrastructure bills, that completely changes the game and moves it outside a realm of politics. This is about how the Canadian economy functionally survives, others leaning into an energy transition that isn't just, post-material kind of climate policy, but actually economy building. That has really changed it. And that is something that every single political party, doesn't matter what your stripe is going to be reckoning with and going to need to have an answer to some degree. Okay, thank you. That's great sort of macro context for us. And a nice segue into my next question for Dallas. Dallas, Evan kind of alluded to the new things that make our regions competitive and how we are more place-based now. And sort of that is a major difference, I think, in terms of how things are happening now in economic development. Can you just talk a little bit about that and what you see as the opportunities for our region?
Yeah, well, it's definitely true. I mean, regional competitiveness, I would say, emerged in the 1990s, like with Michael Porter cluster, where you start to look at firm competitiveness and then expanded it into like place-based competitiveness. And I think the common misunderstanding about that is that competitiveness is not about low taxes. So necessarily, I mean, it can be, but I think a modern contemporary explanation of competitiveness would be much, much more holistic. And Evan sort of alluded to that, is like, you can look at the supply chain strengths, the security, the quality of the education systems, the quality of healthcare systems. You can look at how adaptable the infrastructure is to something like a rising sea level, or like all these sorts of more, you know, alleviating people's anxieties about risk, right? And so I think that's you know, and the list actually goes on. There's a whole theory around this that sort of expands upon all these areas and looks at competitiveness and firm decision making and all that kind of stuff. But in our region, I think, I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about for years and years was that we are an ocean-based city region, right? And you know, we have Indigenous cultures that have, and their view, like to Evan's point, is that the Indigenous viewpoint was never like the economy and the culture and you know, the environment. It's all integrated into just your way of being, right? And so we have Indigenous cultures that have been on this ocean. I think there's 80 coastal nations now across the coastline here. And so here we are on this coast, and we've been talking for years about how to say, you know, we have all these ocean assets. We do shipbuilding. We have the Pacific Navy. You know, we have Coast Guard. We have one of the world's largest ferry systems in the region. Coastline ecology that is now embracing aquaculture and kelp and things like that. And now we need to sort of like organize this and say, hey, look, there's this macro trend around the world of the blue economy that's growing significantly. And our region is either organized and positioning itself to be part of that, or we're going to fall behind. And so that's what we're doing through Coast, as you all know, through looking at the blue economy and how our region is positioned and what strengths we have on technology and innovation and all that kind of stuff. So I think doing that properly, we'll then start to see capital be directed toward investing in entrepreneurs and investing in joint ventures and investing in Indigenous economies that are trying to, again, exploit and position themselves on this. And so competing really is still, to me, a fundamental, because capital can still go pretty much anywhere. Therefore, you have to create a proposition for it, like, and that involves de-risking and you know, exploiting the strengths and the assets and packaging them together and say, hey, look, we have all this stuff here. We just need some capital to come in, and these new things will emerge from that, new companies, new businesses, all that kind of stuff. And then the last piece for context, I think, is that the fact that our region is actually, we have these affordability pressures that we hear about all the time, again and again and again. And one of the solutions to that is to make it more affordable, right? We talked about housing. We need full continuum access to housing for people. We need to retain students and young people coming out of our post-secondaries. But the flip side of that also, or the other side of the coin, I guess is a better metaphor, is that we need to create good, clean, household sustaining jobs. Because, you know, the income and the expenses they go together when it comes to household prosperity. And it's going to be hard. Like, so that's why we talk about collaboration and leveraging our resources and directing capital. We need to do all that stuff so that we can create good household sustaining jobs here, so that our next generation can thrive here. And that, again, that's what competitiveness means for me.
Thanks, Dallas. And just in case those in the audience haven't heard of Coast, can you tell us what it stands for and what it does?
Right. Sorry. Yeah, we use it internally so often that we forget that it's an acronym. So yeah, the Center for Ocean Applied Sustainable Technologies. So this was a project that came out of SIPP's and many other groups' work through the pandemic. And it's really about setting up, I mean, back to this cluster concept. We're looking at the Pacific region of Canada that has all these ocean assets that were sort of a little bit uncoordinated in a way, you could say. And so Coast is saying, like, hey, we have technological change. We have a need for innovating and growing companies. And there's so many examples, like dozens and dozens of examples of these small SME companies that are doing ocean technology related work. And so we need a support ecosystem for them. And that's what Coast is. So it'll be situated here on the South Island through a number of activities here that are going to help foster that innovation culture. But then there'll also be projects and sort of a hub and spoke concept, if you will, across British Columbia that will align, people doing work. There's there's great examples all over British Columbia that are doing this, and we want to create a culture across Pacific Canada, not unlike what Atlantic Canada started doing decades ago. They're just more organized than we are. So we're trying to leapfrog and accelerate and get our ecosystem organized through Coast. So that's what Coast will be, or is, and will be.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Now, Christina, I'm hoping that you can tell us more about the Indigenous Prosperity Center and the work it does and how it came into being.
Okay. So like Coast, the Indigenous Prosperity Center is a result of the Rising Economy Task Force, and the work of the Indigenous Economy Committee is one of the recommendations that was made to create this center. The mandate of the IPC is to advance Indigenous economic reconciliation, to create more regional connectivity, to co-create a more inclusive and sustainable regional economy. We have a 7-member Indigenous Advisory Board, which sets the guiding principles, goals, and priorities of the IPC and measures the impact of our work. And I should comment too that it didn't come out of nowhere. Indigenous inclusion happened at the conception phase of SIPP itself. And there was work done in the very early days before the first board was convened to engage with South Island First Nations. And as a result, we have 9 First Nations who are members of SIPP. So we had the engagement and the relationship work started, and that made it possible to rapidly convene a committee and come up with a recommendation to do this work. So we framed the work of the IPC around the Truth and Reconciliation Call to Action, in particular number 92, which calls upon the corporate sector in Canada to adopt the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a framework for economic reconciliation, and to invest in meaningful relationships, creating educational and economic opportunities for Indigenous people, and doing the work of self-education to become a better partner, such as learning about the history of Indigenous people in Canada. And for the second part of your question about who are the Indigenous people that we're serving, data is not great, and that's actually an area of opportunity that we could contribute to get better demographic data about the Indigenous populations on the South Island and Indigenous economic activity. But as far as we know, there are about 20,000 Indigenous people in Greater Victoria. There are 10 South Island First Nations from Port Renfrew and Malahat down. And each one is fairly small. Songhees Nation, for example, is about 630 people. One of the largest First Nations on Vancouver Island would be Cowichan Tribes at 5,000 people. That's considered quite large. But for most, I think Esquimalt Nation is just over 300 people. So fairly small communities. But we have many people from other parts of the island, from other parts of BC, and from all across Canada, and even Indigenous people from the United States and from other countries in the world who call Southern Vancouver Island home. And we have the Victoria Native Friendship Centre that does a lot of work to serve what we call off-reserve population of Indigenous people. And we also have the Métis Nation of Greater Victoria as one of the organizing organizations for Indigenous people in this area. So I would say that the economic future for First Nation communities is very bright. The communities have a very young demographic, increasingly well-educated, increasingly focused on strategic priorities. And there are many opportunities to partner with First Nations or with Indigenous entrepreneurs. And that work starts with the self-education piece, as I mentioned before, learning before you approach the communities, not asking them to do the work for you, but taking advantage of the many excellent work that's already out there, the thought leadership that's already taken place, things like Caroline Hilton's book. And we'll be collecting more and more of these tools and putting them on our website to assist in this work. But a real area of opportunity for everybody is to look at the South Island Indigenous Business Directory. The URL for it is indigenousbusinessdirectoryvi.com. And when we launched it, there were 50 businesses in June of last year. There's now 90, and it continues to grow. And I think Buy Indigenous should be a fundamental part of any local, Buy Local initiative. So yeah, we'll continue to share through our website, through our podcasts, through social media, and at conferences and gatherings, continue to share the opportunities and to help this region advance the work of economic reconciliation.
So exciting, so important. And we'll throw, I think we could throw the URL for the Indigenous Business Directory into the chat so folks can go there. Wonderful. Yeah, I don't know other organizations in Canada yet, or any organization yet really focusing on Article 92. So we heard yesterday, we already know in British Columbia, we're viewed as leading the pack in Canada in terms of doing this type of work, and plethora of work all around the province being driven by Indigenous communities and people. So thanks for
And
that.
I would say that
Yeah.
the unique piece to it is a regional approach to Indigenous economic reconciliation, because so much of the policy and programming around Indigenous economic development, it's at a national scale, and there is also a provincial scale, but very little at regional level. That really sets us apart.
Thank you. Good point. Okay, Steve, over to you. I have some questions for you about the role that you see, the partners committee. If you can tell everyone a little bit about the municipal partners committee that you're part of, and the work that has gone on with Local Leadership Day, the sister conference to Rising Economy, which we're on day 3 of, as you know. So yeah, can you share your thoughts there?
Sure. So Local Leadership Day, as many may recall, that were part of past Rising Economy conferences, was actually part and parcel with the original event. And last year it was split off and held its own day. I think this was important because it gave an opportunity, a unique opportunity for municipal colleagues to gather and talk together, which doesn't happen on a regular basis. Yes, there's UBCM and our university, Union of BC Municipalities, and there's AVIC, which is the Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities. Those are opportunities where government gathers, but there's not much opportunity where colleagues in municipal politics can get together and talk about it. And so this Local Leadership Day was designed to bring what we thought were issues to colleagues, for them to talk about and say, is there common solutions, shared solutions, and moving it forward. It wasn't meant to be a one-hit wonder where, we just come with a solution at the end of the day and hey, we're all done, which is quite often what happens at some meetings, which is just, okay, we talked about it, it's taken care of. So there were 3 issues that were developed by colleagues across the Capital Regional District. So one was vibrant places, and just looking at the downtown areas of different communities and how do those work together regionally as well as locally. Resilience, both to emergency process and climate change. So how can we work together on that? And lastly, attracting and retaining workers. And the focus in this particular session was those workers in the healthcare industry. But again, it wasn't meant to be a one-hit wonder. The idea was to initiate action and come back to it. So the intent is that a report came out of that, of potential ideas and directions that will come to the AGM of SIPP in June. And then this following fall, there'll be an update of, okay, what have we done? What have we accomplished? But it gives somewhere for the organizations to the municipalities to say, okay, here's what we can contribute. And certainly, prevalent on everybody's mind right now is housing. And that's the one place where most municipalities can have some impact and some direction. And that's, housing at all levels, as Dallas spoke about earlier. It's not just the low cost, it's right up to that doctor and engineer and getting them and retaining them here. So it's shared ideas, it's shared direction, it's collaboration. You're starting to see many of the municipalities are doing shared services, and I mentioned it earlier, whether that's fire or water or recreation or police services. And it's important to build on those, because those communities, those 13 communities here that are part of SIPP, are independent and in their own way, but interdependent in another way. And I think that's the other part to remember, is that, again, I said earlier that the infrastructure is based on this sort of pseudo line around us, but that's what we have to support. But how do we work together to make sure that infrastructure is there for the economy and building the economy?
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. It was really an exciting a day that we had back in November now. And definitely can see how we could just make that deeper and deeper. And so the work really just begins. Thank you for those comments. So now I'm going to open it up. If you have a question from the audience, please submit it into the Q&A, not the chat. We did get a couple directly through direct messages. So pop that into the Q&A. And I'll kick us off with the first question we have from Maya in the audience. She asks, Dallas has highlighted the rise of innovation districts. Now we see more of a focus on the rise of the citizen sector, which is an underutilized local resource. We need more Steve Ducks and Tides programs. I agree, Maya, I totally agree. So now that you've convened the mayors, will there be more of a focus on leveraging our citizen groups? And maybe I'll open this one up to the floor. Maybe first to Steve and then to Dallas. Is there a way to involve more citizen groups?
Absolutely. I think, again, I'll go back to a rising tide, floats all boats. And it is going to take a community to raise this, raise this child per se. And if we can work together, we're going to be so successful. The opportunity there is unbelievable. I have three colors in mind. Dallas spoke about the blue economy that the coast is developing. And then we have the green sustainability. So blue plus green equals what? Equals black, a much stronger, more innovative, developed economy. And that involves everybody from all levels, not just organizations, but citizen groups, because they can contribute in different ways about building their community, our community together.
Yeah, for me, I'm not 100% sure I understand the question exactly, but I think to me, it's a couple of things. One is we have this long time saying that we use when we present to councils and other sort of more citizen-oriented groups that are not talking about innovation and capital and all that kind of stuff. And that is, can the kids come home for Sunday dinner? And that's a fundamental value that many of us have, is like, yeah, we want our kids to be able to stay if they choose to, or come back if they've moved to Toronto or something. And in order to do that, to facilitate that, we need to have opportunity for them to support their household, right? And then this idea of like, can the kids come home for Sunday dinner also implies the grandkids as well, of course. And we all, well, I mean, some of us don't have grandkids yet, but someday. Yeah, so this picture in our mind of like a community. What is a community? A community has to have people from all walks of life. Otherwise, it's a, I don't know what you'd call it, an amusement park or something. So, and then that's part of it. The other part of it is like the role of the citizen in the economy, and that is, we all have purchasing power. We direct our dollars toward stuff that we value, and if we value our communities, then we should be directing more of our purchasing power toward our communities, and that's done in two ways. One is supporting local business. That's a pretty simple concept. Directing more percentage of our discretionary income toward local. And the other one would be through investment. So rarely do we have investment tools where we actually direct our investment, our retirement savings into local assets, right? We put them into mutual funds, which are, we're helping Google and Microsoft and Facebook, with our own money. We're helping them use our resources to create value in the economy that then gets converted or doesn't convert into local value. In most cases, it doesn't, because we don't have a lot of locally publicly traded companies in our local communities. So therefore, we need place-based strategies back to the fundamental, and that includes investment. So how do we direct capital? And it could be organized capital, or it could just be people that have the money to invest in local businesses. And there's tools that are coming out around that will facilitate that, which I won't get into, but that's a couple of things around when I think about the citizen and their role. That would be a couple of them.
Okay, great. Thank you both. I have a question in for Evan. Evan, your perspective is national, provincial. Can you give us your thoughts on what you see more locally in our region? What do you think the opportunities are here?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm a huge fan of the work that SIPP has done through Coast, through the Indigenous Prosperity Center, because I think both start from the right place, which is an understanding of what makes this place unique. And then how do we connect the dots between that and the opportunities while confronting other challenges? So like from what the opportunities are, I think those absolutely stand out as like big places that are bringing people together, that are having the right types of conversations. I still find though that, and this is as true of this region as it is of BC in general, there's this perception almost too much of like, it will come to us. We can rest on our laurels. And because everyone loves BC, because BC is a leader. And I think that is such a fundamental mistake. And that if you look around the world, the places that are succeeding are places that are hungry for it. They're going out there, they're building partnerships, they're seeking out the investments, they're identifying partners, and they're bringing in, they're putting the infrastructure in place, and then they're bringing real things to the table. And I think that really needs a bit of a makeover in BC, that things aren't going to be due to us. There's a risk of us, in Victoria and Southern Vancouver Islands, I think has this in a real way. It's defined by others as a destination. And because it's defined as a destination, that has so much seeped into the DNA of how we think about the opportunities we're creating. And so when I think of the opportunities, it's a different story for the region. And I've mentioned, I think, two of the initiatives that are helping tell a different story. I came here in 2008 for university, and clearly things have changed since then. But the story has only slightly changed about what Victoria is, what Southern Vancouver Island is. So, I mean, some specific examples, but I think the biggest opportunities come from a deliberate focus on a different story. And then also just understanding that, BC in general as a place others view as a destination means we risk being real estate and housing driven in our economy. And if we don't want that, and we don't want the housing affordability challenges we see, we have to build other things. We have to build other draws. We have to be known for other things than sort of safe and stable.
Evan, it's like I told you what to say there, because I swear there's been no collusion, but we wish we'd have had you a couple days ago. We launched at the conference on our first night a new place brand concept called Victoria Rising, and that's something we'll pop into the chat as well. And it's a new after we had about another kind of awakening after the pandemic that came from multiple sectors who said that we're still not very well known for our business and innovation culture. And so this new place brand includes free stock photography, videos, narratives, information in all the communities in the region. And some really exciting stories about folks who have either, built a company or moved here and or chosen to stay here, and what do those stories look like? So it's a work in progress, and we want to hear and get lots of engagement on that. So thank you for not even knowing that you made a plug. That was appreciated. Okay, now I have a question really for the whole group here. What do you see as, we've got just a few minutes left here really, and I'd love to know where you see, and maybe it'd be nice to have some disagreement here, because everyone's been in violent agreement the whole time. But where do we see the biggest challenges for our region? What's the top one that keeps you up at night that we really need to be addressing here? And I'll just throw it over to Christina.
I think that just the one caution I would want to put out there is when we think about, in terms of my area of focus, we're looking at Indigenous economic reconciliation, to think that we can rush that or to think that we can fix things is a really sort of short-term thinking. It's a journey that we're embarking on. It took 200 years to get to the position that we're in now. It will take a long time for us to sort of work on healing some of the damage that's been done and co-creating new ways of doing things. So I think we need to be really patient and really invested in that. This is never going to end, this work. It's the beginning of a journey to create the best Canada we can be together. Thank you.
Thank you. Great words. Steve, over to you.
Sure. I mean, I'm going to somewhat agree with Christina that we can't rush into this, but we can't be fearful of working together. And I think that's, you want to kind of hold your cards close to your chest. And I think we need to jump in and say, okay, we're in this together. We love living here. How do we continue to make sure that's accessible to everyone and make it happen so that we can be that successful thing? But it's not going to happen next year. Dallas said it earlier in a previous conversation about how the housing crisis started 30 years ago when here we are now trying to resolve it. Well, it's not going to be resolved next month or next year, and so we have to work together towards that. And that interdependence is important. That regional approach is important because we can't do it. As I said earlier, you can do it alone, but you can't do it alone.
Well
Can I
said.
just want to add one thing to that? The one thing that I think, one risk that I see on that is that collaboration, like when you talk about like what it actually takes to work together towards solving a problem, it's really hard. So it's actually really the risk there is that we sort of lose patience for working together, and we sort of drop out and we're like, you know what, I can just move faster alone, which is actually true. You can actually move faster on some files, not big infrastructure files and stuff. But so I think that's a risk of the way that we're doing things. Like if you go back to the recession, we didn't have a SIPP model back in the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, and then our regions stagnated for years and years, and we never thought to collaborate. We just sort of were like, oh no, we got tourism, we're a government town, we're stable enough. So it was like this idea of just complacency. And then the other part of this that I think is a risk for us is I'm really concerned about incrementalism. When it comes to some of these big problems like climate change and the housing crisis, I'm afraid that we're just going to be like, okay, well, we're going to do like a big press release because we built like a 200 unit apartment building, and we're like, oh, see, we're solving the housing crisis. Meanwhile, there's like a need for 5,000. And so that I hate to just celebrate mediocrity and incrementalism. I think we just need to be aggressive, and collaboration makes it harder to be aggressive, but it's also what we need to be aggressive by leveraging all these things. So that's a big challenge, I would say.
Okay, I opened up the Pandora's box. I knew it. Evan, can you answer that question in 30 seconds or less?
I sure can, but I'm not going to deliver on the brief because what Dallas just said is exactly the two words I wrote down. I think it's swagger and ambition. And I think that there's good enough, stable enough. These are going to be killers in Victoria and in the Southern Island. We need to get leaning in. We need to decide we're good at things and then go after them much more aggressively.
Okay, perfect final notes. Well, I really would love to thank the panelists for your amazing contributions today. And of course, thank the audience for being with us and for staying engaged on day 3 of this conference. And also, of course, Pacific Hand for allowing this panel to take place in the first place. Thank you very much for your partnership. And I'll hand the floor back over to Kieran to wrap us up. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for your time today to join this session. Thank you, Laurie and Pacificam, for supporting this year's event and today's conversation with your introduction. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, RBC, and our Catalyst sponsor, Vancity, as well. There are still 3 more sessions remaining in the 2024 Rising Economy Conference. This and other virtual sessions will be posted to our website and YouTube in the coming weeks. We'll see you at the next session, which is Ownership Matters, Strategies for the Oncoming Business Succession Wave. Thank you very much.